We're looking at as a profile under soyas. I don't know the details of yield, etc., and we're not going to worry too much about that. I think what the main thing that I want to discuss here is you guys need to look at this profile, and I want your immediate assessment as to good or bad soil.
Marginal.
Good, marginal.
Marginal.
Looks like the
Rubbish.
Cape. Looks like the Cape.
That's a bit better than the Cape soils, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, all right. Okay, so the essence being that you can classify the soil. We're quickly going to run through the classification process, and just for interest sake, how many of you have done work with soil classification? You guys are aware of which book are you using? The blue book?
The old red book.
The red book. Okay, so there are a couple of people with the red book, then there's the blue book, and then there's a new one since 2019, which we euphemistically call the green book. It's not green, but it's an expanded system. Okay, so how to deal with that? If you're really interested in that, there's a manuscript in publication at this stage that correlates the three classification systems in terms of structure and redox morphology and so on. So that we're putting out, it's with Water SA. We're just waiting for the final publication date. So it's been sorted. Those of you who are interested can get that. It should be freely available. I'll send it to you as well. Okay. And that explains the correlation between the classification systems and how the philosophy works between them. The main thing that I want you to understand is when we look at this profile, we're going to classify it. The classification is going to, according to many of us, tell us what the potential is. Okay? Not necessarily that, and we'll get to some of those things a bit later on. But the main thing I want you to understand with this profile is that we've referred to it as marginal soils, and we'll discuss the water aspect of this profile at the end. Is if you look at the position in the landscape, first thing you look at is position in the landscape. Where does this thing sit? The crest of the landscape sits up there. Valley bottom sits down there. So we're mid-slope. And in South African geology, predominantly, I'm not talking about dolomites, I'm talking about our geology. The geology we've got here, sandstones, etc. Probably sandstone, predominantly sandstone area with dolerite intrusions, which we don't see any examples of here now, but mainly sandstones and shales in here and so on. Is that of the rain that falls, less than 1% goes to groundwater. That's what geohydrological modeling and testing in this area would indicate. Less than 1% of the rainfall goes to groundwater. That means 99% of the rainfall has to be dealt with within the soil profile or immediately beneath it, or as surface runoff. And you guys are here at a regenerative agriculture workshop, so your ears should already start thinking about runoff, etc. and so on.
Infiltration.
So I cannot bank on a lot of infiltration. Our geology doesn't allow it. Okay, so typically in a landscape like this, I will have at the crest what we refer to as recharge soils, soils where the water will infiltrate beyond the root zone, and then that soils will encounter hard rock profiles or impermeable layers, and it will start coming laterally through the profile. And remember that it's cumulative with the rainfall falling here as well, and then that rainfall and the water will go through the profile, and at some point during certain years and so on, you'll have a phreatic surface almost intercepting the landscape surface there, what we refer to as artesian little seeps and so on. Okay, typical of those seeps, you're going to see a red rust color or sometimes an oily sheen on it. Don't know how many of you have seen that. Everywhere. So why are you guys dumping so much oil in the landscape? It's not oil. Okay. I've dealt with compliance processes where people have always been taken to court about the oil. It's not oil. It's manganese and iron. The manganese and iron, which we're going to see in this profile as well, is mobilized through reduction processes, meaning under microbial activity it is reduced, gereduceer, wordt opgelost, it's dissolved, moves with the water, and then it precipitates in certain areas. But once it gets and the water exits the landscape, you have intercept with oxygen, and the iron starts and manganese starts oxidizing, becomes insoluble, starts forming thin films on the water. Okay.
All right.
So the way to distinguish between oil and manganese is the one giving you the oily sheen, is that if you put a stick, your finger through it, it breaks up in little shards.
Yes.
Okay, and not an oily streak. And you know it's mineral, it's not oil. Okay, so it's a natural process, but that same fluctuation of water in the profile and iron and manganese in that profile gives us the morphology of the soil. So this soil, I'm not here to debate the ages of the earth, okay? I'm going to have to talk about how old our landscape is. So sometimes I get debates. We're not here to debate that. South Africa's landscape is a very old, geologically old and stable landscape. We have around Gauteng, Carltonville area, soil profiles where parts of the profile have been dated at 7 million years of age. Okay, so that's old, very mature landscape, meaning that a lot of erosion and a lot of weathering has taken place, which is what you see in this profile. So lots of intensive weathering of that iron and manganese. So, and that is what we use to classify the soil. So the first thing we're going to look at here is, when we use the principles in the blue book, we classify from the surface down, identify master horizons, and then we identify which diagnostic horizons there are. Meeste horisonte wat ons dan diagnostiese horisonte klassifiseer. Reg, so wat nou gebeur is. Ons kyk daar af en dan sien julle the first transition is about 20-25 centimeters there. Clearly see a transition there. Okay, of one horizon, then another one, and then we've got this hard splintered layer down below that is a bit wavy, so the depth varies. Okay, so this we can classify it, but it is obvious from the profile, you guys should see it as well, that there's a lot of mixing between that and that. So this profile has been worked. You guys want to come and have a look at closer, come stand closer. It has been worked. That's what sê weer 14 jaar gelede en terug van daar af. So daar's baie vermenging wat plaasgevind het. Jy sien konkresionêre materiaal in hierdie A-horison en jy sien van die A-horison materiaal daar binne. Okay. Dit was alles deel van die proses om die profiel geskik te maak. Right. So is dit 'n ortiese A, verskeurde A, maar dit is konvensie, kan ons hom 'n ortiese A noem, en dan het ons wat lyk na geelbruin afdale horison met bietjie vlekkerigheid, nie genoeg om 'n plintief te maak nie. Klomp concretionaire, lots of concretionary materials. Those concretionary materials are formed, and the mottles are formed by the water that comes through the landscape that now flows in the lowest part. Every time it rains, you've got a pulse of water coming through. That water then fills up and through piston effect pushes out air and draws in air every time that happens. So there's air going in and out from the surface. So, and that's that manganese and iron sheen that you see in certain places, present here as well. So as it goes up, it coats soil particles, and it comes down, coats soil particles. So what happens with the concretion is, over time, it builds manganese from nothing to often big concretion. So these can form in the profile, or they can also be inherited from other previous epochs with erosion and so on. So
and
we've got
that's from wetting and drying cycles.
Those are wetting and
and where
drying
you've
cycles.
got air present.
Yes,
when you're drying.
because the minerals that are in the concretions and in the mottles are oxidized versions of iron and manganese, and therefore
You've
it has
got the
to have
red
oxygen.
colours and all
It
of
has
that
to have
that's showing
oxygen.
here.
Once it goes grey, then it's no oxygen.
Yeah, that's
No,
like this stuff at the bottom over
Grey
here.
we refer to as iron depletions, and high chroma mottles we refer to as iron accumulations, or redox depletions and redox accumulations. Okay, but it tells us what the hydrology of the profile is, long-term hydrology, not what happened yesterday. Okay, right. So the profile is typically in a let's give it a name, and I'm not going to debate the name. We're just going to give it a name. So let's say this is an orthic A over a yellow brown apedal, because the concretions is not a diagnostic criterion. So it's a yellow brown apedal over hard flintite. That would make it a Glencoe soil form. Okay, so it could be Glencoe. You could push this into a Vosbank for those of you who are
There's has to be
critical
more
about
sandy
that,
plus-
or we can go to /Avalon /whatever. So, but it's in that zone. Okay.
Are
What
we
I'm
seeing
on-
an
what I
E
want-
horizon? No,
Sorry?
no. Are we seeing an E horizon?
The bleaching, we've got to determine whether it's sufficient enough to qualify as an E. This is probably borderline. So the convention is that if I've got an A horizon that is bleached, that we would classify it as an A and an E if the depth there is 35 centimeters or more. Okay, so we're not in that, so I would be comfortable with a Glencoe. We see elements of bleaching. We see
Soil scientists, 47 opinions.
two soil scientists.
47
Yeah,
opinions.
47. That's not enough opinions. The essence being that we are in a yellow-brown apedal, we sit with a transitional one, which is borderline. So I've got to determine the color. In essence, it is similar functioning in this case. So that is what we want to get at: is what's the functioning of this profile. Right. So now I'm going to ask: is good or bad soil? Good soil. Marginal soil in the context, you might have better, deeper profiles, but you've got a profile that feeds water at certain times depending on rainfall events. It can also become dry. You can see here, this white zone here is what we refer to as the pellet zone, or the main water movement zone, but it's dry now, which means that this thing hasn't had water in its feeding area for quite some time. Because the main mechanism of wetness in this profile is, that's a question now, is it from the top or from the bottom?
Lateral.
Lateral, it's from the bottom. So this soil profile has underground irrigation. Most of the soils in Botawil and those Bultfontein and those soils, many of those soils are actually fed by subsurface water rather than your rainfall. So a lot of those guys can get good yields even though the rainfall becomes marginal. It's because of that feeding mechanism. It's not a constant one. It can also become depleted depending on a whole range of conditions. Okay, so the question is this a good A horizon? And the question I have for you is this A horizon, this material here, if you look at that, would you say that there's been no till on this soil for 14 years?
No, not really. It's very dense still. There's not a lot of visible aggregation.
Exactly. So there's not a lot of visible aggregation, and it's not an indictment on the no-till. What it is an indictment on the original wanting to work this soil. These soils have got dispersive clays to a degree, fine texture, which means that they close up quickly and you get a poor aeration issue and you get a destruction of the structure when you work it, and that's why this soil degrades quickly and it's going to take a long time to rehabilitate. So how do we rehabilitate a soil like this?
Tell me, please, because I have lots of that. Put it under pasture.
Okay,
Put it under pasture.
so one is put it under pasture. How do I get the rehabilitation of this thing going? So we've done now, it's now zero till for 14 years, 16 years. How do I get this thing sorted out? What is the one silver bullet? Carbon, roots, biomass, organic material, etc. How do I get that in? I have to improve water infiltration here. So what is already happening here with all this, helping a lot. Okay, masking soil temperature, because this soil temperature, if it was bare, if you left it bare and wanted to infiltrate the water and you had these clumps of structural units lying around, massive structure, you could get water infiltration, but you're burning off all the carbon. Now at least you've got a little blanket. If it's bare, the temperatures in summer can go to what temperatures? 70 degrees easily. We've measured them at above 70 degrees. Okay, which means 20 centimeters down in the profile, you're still above 40. Zero root development. Okay, and I'm going to explain one of the implications of this temperature just now. So park that. Johnny, I think you want to need them. Okay. Right, so what have we got now? If we've got this little blanket on it, whether it's a living or a dead mulch, your temperature here very rarely goes above ambient air temperature. which means we're probably on a hot day here 30, 35 degrees maximum and not 70. Which means the gradient further down, temperature decreases, the fluctuation decreases, and it's quite stable down below, which means we can be here at about 20 degrees. Okay, have a look at the soyas, have a look at how far those roots go. There are roots down there, see that? Okay, so the roots are at least 70 centimeters deep there. So the soyas can exploit that, but you see that not in terms of this, not a lot of root up development up here. Okay. So the key is to build organic carbon. With every 0.1% organic carbon, and this is now a test of what we looked at yesterday, and whether you guys can remember. For every 1.1% organic carbon increase, there is a significant increase in water holding capacity.
50 mils.
So
50 mils.
50 moles.
Was it
1%.
1?
Kyk, daar's
1%, so it's 5
'n
moles.
verskil tussen organiese materiaal en koolstof.
Ja, 1.7.
Ek wil nou by dit ook uitkom.
Deel
So
dit
daar's
met
wat
1.7.
ja, so maar dit is betekenisvol. It's significant.
Just
Okay.
do it.
Just do it. Yeah.
Can you maybe, I don't know, put Quibus on the spot, but maybe where he's got experience, you know, with hiring or buying lands that's been degraded like this, in terms of, you know, just coming in and how to kickstart the,
How I do it.
yeah.
That's why I don't want to come to this conference. First of all, if it's degraded, I degrade it again. Plow it, rip it,
Sort it out.
sort it out, chemical,
Yeah.
pH, everything.
Yeah.
Then I start with dekgewas cover.
So imagine your dekgewas you'll do in the summer period when
The summer period.
when it's getting a temperature range to grow and produce maximum biomass and roots and everything. And your preferred species to do that?
Forward.
Your preferred species that you include?
Normally
in-
5 or 6 mix, not too many. Babala and the sorghum, something like that. And your radish, radijse. En dan ook jou boontjies en jou sunhemp en wywieke en daai goed. Ja. Maar nie te veel, 6 of 7. Want onder daai grond is nog nie lekker. Jy kort aggressiewe wortelstelsels. En jou babala help vir dit en dit is die materiaal ook wat agterbly. En ons wy daai intensief nogal. Ons probeer 2 of 3 keer bewy, dan rol ons op plat, ons spuit ons hom dood en dan los ons. En die next year we plant cash crops.
I want you guys to hear one thing that he said. He sorts out the pH first, and that is one reason for working the soil still. Get the pH sorted out. Your biggest return on investment, guys, it doesn't sound that way, it doesn't sound regenerative, it doesn't sound green. Your biggest return on investment on any row crop or any forage crop or so is lime. Not fertilizer, nothing else, lime. That's if there's a pH problem. Get the pH right, then you have the zone to work with all the other things you can. Okay, yes.
Johan,
I don't know if guys can also chip in here. Local guys have been doing it for years. Obviously, we've been doing it in Natal for quite some time. Obviously, your pH is your important thing, as you say. Alarming number one. Sorting out in the beginning is very easy because you can work the soil, get it sorted, that stuff. But after 5, maybe 10 years of no-tilling, where you don't want to carry on working the soil, what's the easiest way to get lime down?
Okay. There are two things. Sorry, there are two things you got to look at that. Number one is, if you still have to get lime into that system, there's something acidifying that system. You got to address that first. And the biggest driver of acidification is ammonia or urea-based fertilizers that you put into the soil, and of which that nitrogen is then not used by the plant. So the first thing you're going to do is, and I'm sorry in that sense, if there's anyone who sells nitrogen fertilizer, this is not the place. Unfortunately, so you're going to have to decrease your nitrogen applications. You have to, because the excess nitrogen is the acidification. Average acidification in the higher rainfall areas of South Africa is equivalent to 1 ton of lime per year. Okay, so if you don't want to incorporate the lime, if you don't want to buy the lime, don't apply the nitrogen. Finish and close. Second thing is, if you have to get it in, then a systematic approach with soil health, with things such as humates, fulvic acid, small quantities of lime regularly, That's the way that and gypsum. Gypsum is going to help your calcium migrate. So you might not change the pH, but you will change your calcium to aluminium ratios, calcium and so on. And so you will slightly up the or decrease the exchangeable acidity in the lower profile. But that takes time. It's something that you've got to build. You've got to work on it constantly. Okay. So there's no quick fix. So the first thing is don't mess it. If you spend the money to sort it out, don't let it degrade again. So be very careful how you deal with it.
You answered my question there perfectly in terms of after that amount of years, 10 years, why is there the problem? Why is it still acidic? Nitrogen application. Thank you.
Guys, nitrogen sounds like a swear word. It's a brilliant product. It's like chocolates. Man, if I ate 10 chocolates a day, I would be in trouble. But 1 chocolate a week is like money from home. Okay, so it's balanced.
I just want to mention why plow sometimes. You must remember if you take out degraded farm or soil whatsoever, weed resistance also.
Yeah.
You can't kill it with chemicals.
Yeah.
Hy's
So you've got jy compound
maar
probleem,
totally
ja.
ploeg hom, kry die verdigting op, kry die kalk in, stel hom chemies reg sien and then start from that.
I think the correlation is like with hospital. You know, you don't want to go to hospital for regular things, but when you've really got a problem, you're grateful there's an ICU and there's a chirurg or whatever that can sort things out, and you're really taking it to ICU, and you're doing stuff that is not, in the long term you wouldn't do that because that's not part of health in the long term. But as a crisis, it's like a crisis intervention.
Spesifiek ploeg of rip, want
Okay, maar ek dink is 'n baie relevante vraag. Kom kyk na hierdie profiel. Ek wil vir julle nou vra. I want to ask you guys, is this profile one that we should rip or not?
Jy gaat hom vlak rip. Hoorie vlak. Jy gaat hierdie grond, nie meer as 20, 25.
Jy gaan 'n bietjie
Maar
weer
ploeg
bietjie.
ook. Ekskuus, want ek boer net hier agter en ek moes my ploeglaag gaan opbreek vir te rippe.
Ja,
Nou die eerste keer genoutel het.
onthou ek
Kom,
sê
kyk gou
ek sê weer as ons ploeg ons om daai kweek. Net om terug te gaan.
Maar dis die doel.
My seun het toe hy 9 jaar oud is, ons ry elke dag by 'n plaas verby waar klomp ploë onder 'n boom staan van 'n ander ou. Toe vra hy my pa, wat is daai? So hy het nie geweet eers wat se ploeg nie, al het ek 'n groot Walton ploë. Jy weet wat ek ook lank terug gebou het, platbou het, daai Walton groot ploë. So ons probeer daai onkruid regtig. Kweek kry jy nie dood gedis nie. Kry hom dood gerip nie. En ek dink ons moet daai Amerikaner vra, hy het ook gesê moenie bang wees. Ek sê altyd moenie gat vas wees nie. As jy gat vas is, gaan jy gat sien.
Nee, die rede hoekom ek dit vra, hier staan baie
Maar
mense
ek
hier
sal-
vandag
ek
wat
sal-
dalk kan weggaan met die gedagte net ploeg. Dan stuur ons hulle dalk met die verkeerde gedagte weg.
As ek kan op ploege kom en dan rip buitel of rip. Dan wat se tipe grond jy het. Hierdie ek is nou nie 'n grondkundige nie, maar ek sal sê hierdie is 'n vlak Avalon of 'n dieperagere Wesley. Is dit nie?
Ek weet nie eens hulle van hom Wesley te noem. Hy gaan eintlik na 'n Glencoe Thomas baie self.
Okay. Maar daai gronde sal ook baie vlak werk met 'n tand. Jy wil nie in daai klei ingaan. Glad nie.
En wat dis hoekom ek wil vra daaroor, want as jy begin rip en jy gaan in hierdie concretion, if you go into this concretionary layer, because of our old profile, it's already been degraded here, but you have a change in clay minerals from the surface to the bottom and association with organic carbon. Lots of organic carbon in natural state, little. So bring that clay up, any of that clay up, it's much more prone to hard setting, so you get crusts. You get raindrop impact type crust, you get aeration issues, you get a whole bunch of things that come in with
And
when
as
you
jy-
bring this material up this
As
way.
jy daai klei rip 400-500 diep. Baie ons doen dit daar, want hoe harder, louer 'n trekker rook. Ja, dan werk ons mos nou. Nee. Maar as jy 'n sweep op daai ripskaar het, beloof ek vir jou, gaan jy verdigting hê, daai wortel sal nie daardeur gaan nie. Dan sit jy met 'n probleem. Hoe maak jy dan daai verdigting los, hè? En dit is nogal slim, want die lammekoenigs het my eendag gevra, want toe sê hulle nee, hulle sal paraplows insit. Dus ek weet julle wat gaan ek doen? Ek gaan net daai gronde los in 'n cover crop plant, laat die soos hy nou gesê suurstof en die vog, en dis mos klein. Hy swel en krimp, swel en krimp. Hy het homself opgebring.
Yeah,
So ons moet net 'n tyd gee, né?
So the biological option should always be the alternative.
Yeah.
To actually the first option.
En ek is nie slim nie. Ek het dit maar net geleer uit foute wat ek gemaak het.
Nee, ons almal weet
If you think of that photo of Blue Shepherd yesterday with his windrow, what that windrow did to that soil, then
It's incredible.
just enough biomass with whatever, obviously cover crops will have to play a role, but biomass will solve
Biomass is
Yeah, and just a comment also, if one's going to put pasture or grass or whatever, that initially, I don't know, in the comment, but an annual is going to give you much quicker results, much more biomass by its nature, than if you come in and put a perennial. You know, even if you do short duration perennial, am I correct?
Yeah, I can't say too much about that. I agree with you, but I think a variety is obviously a lot better. And what I like in situations like this is choosing whether they're annuals or perennials and so on, but with very strong root systems, nice tap root systems, because I want to puncture this thing. Because remember, this soil is now hard set. This soil is rock hard, and you're going to say this is a plow layer, but this is a hard setting upon drying. Once the soil is wet, that's quite loose. Okay, so if it's wet, then you can get the roots can go through, and I want to exploit that as far as possible. We know that the roots will penetrate to about 60-70 centimeters, which is perfect in the soil. It might even go into the hard plinthite where there's pockets of soft material. But we need to up this, and I need to improve the structure in this. The bottom line about this soil is that since the first time it was plowed, this thing has been degraded. Okay, and you're not going to fix this under natural conditions. This is a challenging soil already. Okay.
Ek het nou ploeg genoem as kies. Ploeg is nou 'n makliker taal. Maar dis wat ek wil sê van die Amerikaner. Hy het gister daar gewys. En wat ons nou doen is ons het 'n implement van Keis. Tiger Mate. Hy het 5 balke. Wat sy tande gesterker is. Sy skare is klein en hy werk baie vlak. Jy kan hom in elke draai of die myne kan jy met die een kan jy met die rekenaar beheer en die ander een is mekanies. Stel jy hom dat hy of 'n duim diep loop of elke draai wat jy gee gaan hy 'n kwart of 'n inch dieper. Hy loop net onder die ondervlakte en hy haal daai kweek solied uit. En dan kan jy kom en bytel. Dis wat ons nou doen van 'n jaar terug. Voordat ek daai ding wat ek kon nog nie die regte ding kry nie. En die ou langs my voer die kellies in as die Whitfield. Dit werk nie by my. Jy moet die regte ding doen en hy het daarvan gepraat. So onthou ons by sy gat vra 'n bietjie oor daai implement. Tiger Mate.
Ek wil net oor die water en temperatuur praat gou hierso. Ek weet nie hoeveel tyd is daar. 1-2 minute. Okay.
4 minute.
Okay, so wat ek wil hê julle moet kyk is die wat van daai kant af kyk sal sien dis 'n droë profiel. Die wat van die kant af kyk sal sien is dit nat, is it moist or is it dry?
It's a bit of moisture.
Okay, so I want to show you how much moisture is in this profile. When last did it rain? When last did it rain? Okay, so where does the water come from? Pure magic, hey. So it comes from the bottom. But how does it come from the bottom if it's not capillary rise water anymore? How does this water get there? Okay, and that is, indulge me for a minute about talking about where welwitschas get their water from. We did a study on the welwitschas in Namibia. You guys know what a welwitscha is, okay? Right, the desert plant. So where does the welwitscha get its water from? Any of you know? We've all been taught that it's groundwater. Hey, that thing's got a tap root that goes down 80 meters. So the seedling? Umagay. So it's not a tap root. It's actually only got an adventitious root system. It doesn't go beyond 1 meter. Okay. So the question arises now. It gets 15 millimeters of rainfall a year, but it gets mist every day, and there's groundwater at 80 meters. Where does it get its water from? So a lot of people say mist. So they did For that investigation, they did isotope studies, and it turns out that less than 1% of the water in the Welwitschia is from mist origin. 99% is from rainfall origin.
Rainfall. Ancient rainfall.
15 millimeters of rainfall a year, perhaps, and the bulk of the water of the Welwitschia is rainwater. Okay. So the mechanism, if you look at the profile, it's as obvious as daylight in this profile. There's water down below. Whether that water comes laterally or whether it's due to rainfall, the water infiltrates to an impermeable layer, and it's more readily saturated there than at the surface. But if you go and collect soil anywhere in the country, you can go and collect the drier soil. You can go, next time you go to the Kalahari, go and find a dune, collect some soil, put it in a bag, close the bag up, and it sweats. Okay, so the key to that is that all soil air is always 95% plus saturated with water vapor. So the relative humidity of soil air is always 95% plus. Remember that. That is pretty much stock standard. Okay, and it happens everywhere. So what happens here with temperature? Now we've got a temperature variation. Down below the temperature is quite stable now at 20 degrees. Doesn't fluctuate during the day. The air there is 95% saturated with moisture, with water vapor. The plant can't use water vapor, remember that. But as we come further to the surface, closer to the surface, the temperature fluctuates between day and night temperatures. So it might go to 40 degrees during daytime. Let's say it started off at 10 degrees in the morning. That's a 30-degree increase. How much water vapor extra can water at 40 degrees hold compared to 10 degrees? Significantly. So there's a water vapor gradient out of the soil from down below. There's a gradient, so the water vapor migrates upwards. It happens all over. Okay. That migrates upwards. Now that the temperature in the soil, remember there's not a lot of gas exchange, so it's not as if all that moisture is going out. You're losing the moisture from that surface there. So the more bare the surface is, the more you mine the water vapor from down below outwards. The more of a blanket you've got, the more you keep that moisture in the soil. Now the temperature was 40 degrees and it cools down, and it was now 40 degrees at 95% plus relative humidity. Cools down to 10 degrees at night perhaps. Where does the water go? The air's potential to hold water is gone. So the water condensates in the surface parts on especially quartz particles, etc. Okay, and I've been in soil science for 30 years. I only became aware of this mechanism recently. And there are publications about it. Okay, so it's not as if it's something new.
Years old when you figured it out.
No. So it is a very well-known mechanism of water redistribution and profiles in arid environments. It's well known. It's a major flux. So what are you having in this profile here? You probably, and this is one of the main reasons why when you drive past here immediately in the morning, these plants will look okay. When that water is now depleted due to the plant's evapotranspiration demand, the plant will go into protection mode. Okay. All right. So remember that, and that is why the more water you can hold in your profile through increasing the organic carbon content, through increasing surfaces where this water can condensate, the more resilient your system becomes. You won't solve the drought, but you'll weather the drought. Okay. Okay, any questions on that? That's basically my spiel.
Johan, why do you advocate putting humic acid in the soil?
Why do I advocate putting humic acid in the soil? This is perhaps a very good profile. So zero tillage for 14 years brings you that far. But if I add, for instance, if I had to put down 20 kilograms of humates on this soil, I will get a quite a rapid reaction in terms of loosening up the soil. And I can show you data in Patensi and Addo, etc., where hardened soil, where poor water infiltration, we can turn that thing around in 3 weeks with humates, Cebrix, and trichoderma. And the main thing comes out with trichoderma. A lot of people say, what about trichoderma, yay or nay? A lot of conservation agriculture people don't like trichoderma. We use trichoderma for one thing, and that is to boost, apart from its pesticidal effects and fungicidal effects and so on. So it's registered as a fungicide, it's registered as a couple of things. But the other reason why I use trichoderma, our strain specifically becomes an endophyte. It stimulates root development, significant root development. And what's the most stable form of carbon that I can get in the soil? It's not what I add to this burns off. It's root exudates. So the more active the root system, the more sustainable my carbon building in the soil becomes. So anything that I can use to trigger that, those would be certain adjuvants, certain things such as kelps, etc. All these types of products, they have a similar function. Trichoderma, humates. What does a humate do? The humate helps in opening and stabilizing these dispersive clays. So you get better structure formation, you get a bit better aeration, better infiltration. So I can short circuit the process like this by initially starting off with humates, and if you really follow the regenerative approach, you can do it quicker like that, and you can phase into your sustainable system over time, but you get a quicker turnaround on this instead of having to try and build this over many years. So there are a couple of ways of doing that.
Could you substitute compost for that?
I would not bring compost into a system like, because you're spending a lot of money on making compost. You're bringing it in here, and the first thing it does is it all burns off. So I would rather put in here what I can do here to stimulate microbial activity, which is going to give me the sustainable carbon. Mulches, yes, perfect, but your compost actually only becomes a mulch. You spend a lot of money to make a mulch.
That's why I'm putting it up on the field in the raw form, so it happens on the field.
Perfect,
Exactly,
yeah,
there you go,
because then you've got those microbial, you've got the whole succession of microbes there. Perfect, yeah, and you're saving a lot of money there because they're doing all the work there.
Can I venture a sugar industry idea about what Cobus was doing here? We have a similar scenario where the sugar industry soils are very acidic, low in P, and we use a lot of K as well.
Yeah.
So, like Cobus does, we need to fix the acidity, the acid saturation, and we take samples up to 80 centimeters because we want to exploit the whole profile for the water. And you know, it's very acidic down there. We're looking at 4 pH, etc. So we do similar to Cobus. We put on the lime gypsum. Be very careful. Only put on what they recommend, because gypsum strips your nutrients out of the soil.
Yeah, it displaces potassium and so on. Yeah.
So,
well, lime will do similarly, but it reacts slightly differently.
yeah. Okay, so also mix them together. What I do is I also then mix that with compost, the raw compost, because as I saw Elaine Ingham being quoted quite often yesterday, she said that if you mix organic matter and lime and gypsum, you get 5 times the effect. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm still putting on what's required for the soil, but I'm mixing it with organic matter. So I'm creating a big buffering capacity in the soil.
What we do with that is we incorporate some humates,
Yeah.
and I make calcium humates out of that process, and we've got a stable calcium that actually.
All right, so we're achieving the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
All right.
What product is that?
No, it's a mix. I can tell you now.
Okay. Then we got to fix P. So what I use is I use a product out of our sugar mill. It's called fly ash. So it's about 50% biochar. Then it's got silicon, calcium, potassium, phosphate, and I put that on at 100 tons a hectare. 100 tons a hectare. So we fixed the pH, we fixed the phosphate, we've got enough thing, and then I grow a cover crop on it. I do plow it under. I disc it in first to get a proper mix, because you can't plow and stuff that's only lying on the soil, because you get a very little
sliver.
narrow slither like that. So you got to mix the soil, then you plow it under, so you get big layers of ameliorated soils. Then I grow a cover crop, and our oats will grow like this.
Sure.
Okay, we're talking different climate. Eh?
Yeah.
We got 850 moles a year. We got 3 farms, one 750, one 850, and one is 1,350. Okay, but we're talking in general. Okay, then we grow the cover crop, which we mulch. We don't have a cattle operation. It would be ideal to add a cattle operation to our scenario. So we mulch it, and we then plant into that. So we actually minimum till, and we open up for us into that mulch mix. Alright. And the idea is that we then grow the biggest crop we can on the first cycle, because you've got a 10-year cycle, so there are 5 crops one crop every 2 years, but we grow 5 crops. So you grow the biggest crop, and it links up with the idea to create a root system that puts the carbon and the capillaries and the fishes into the soil. And then when you cut it, you get the first return, second return, third return, etc. And then we go back and do a recheck. I've now been farming on that farm for 40 years, and I'm not using lime or gypsum anymore.
Because it's now stabilized.
And I actually don't have to use phosphate.
Yeah, because your pH approach is neutral, the phosphorus becomes so much more available, and you have a huge phosphorus reserve that you apply. Question just quickly on that is, you use something like trichoderma to stimulate root development?
Nothing.
Okay. Are you willing to do a few lines and check what it does to your yield?
I'm planting again in spring, contact me.
Okay, I'll get your number.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it has in sugarcane we've seen that already. It has a significant effect, and then also has a significant effect on pest suppression. Should you have things such as aphids, etc. So, but there's a whole discussion on stuff.
Yeah, it's just that was for interest for them.
Thanks, Johan.
The mixed product would be something like you can even use powder humates and lime. What it does is that as soon as it goes into solution or becomes wet, the calcium reacts with the humate and forms a calcium humate. Travels a bit further.
How much to how much?
We generally, on the blueberries and these things, we dose for instance, once a week at about, they do through irrigation, drip irrigation, 5 kilograms of fine nanocal with about a kilogram of humate. So it's a much lower rate to what you line it, but it has a deep reaction. So there are a couple of things you can do with it.
To ameliorate or to feed?
To feed and also to ameliorate the pH, but it's a slow process, but it's mainly calcium feeding and getting calcium into the soil through irrigation mechanisms that are difficult otherwise, because they can't incorporate under the weed mats and stuff. And getting it through, and the calcium levels in the blueberries have been going through the roof, so we can even got the Australians wanting to know what to do now, so we've got to find out whether they got some of the product.
Baie dankie hoor. Dit was baie vergewend. Ek het baie geniet. Ek boer ook net jare in die veld, so nou leer ek ook hier. Ja, baie dankie hoor.
You're going to